come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to a special episode of Geeky Gentleman here on Geeky Gentleman History Month, the month in which we discuss the history of geeky gentlemen that was ignored because of a biased educational system, except not at all. Anyway, I'm Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Comics Kid 2099. Did I get it right?
Yep. Hey.
Yay! So Comics Kid was a member on Who Reviews the Reviewers, and as always, we like to invite them on to do guest episodes. And Comics Kid, of course, you're welcome to come on anytime you hear that we're doing an interesting topic. So
Awesome, yeah.
Yep, we would be glad to have you. So anyway, it being that it's History Month now, we're just getting started out with that and everything. And Comics Kid has kind of a fascination with King Arthur. I asked what his pick would be, and he wanted to do King Arthur. And we decided that a good way to kind of mesh those two things, History Month and King Arthur, would be with the 2004 film King Arthur.
Yep.
By Bruckheimer?
He was the producer. I can't remember who the director of the film was. It's the one with Keira Knightley and Clive Owen.
Yeah, and Mr. Fantastic.
Yeah. I can never pronounce his name. I don't know how to even start with that name.
I don't know. That bugged the hell out of me the whole movie because the beard just threw it off enough. I'm like, I know I recognize this dude, but I could not place it for the life of me. I had to IMDb it, and at that point, it just doesn't count, you know?
Right.
So anyway, yeah, so this is an interesting beast because I feel it meshes well with the idea of doing History Month because it at least claims that it's more historically accurate than anything else with King Arthur.
Right. It makes that claim, and I think when you compare it to other King Arthur media, you could definitely say it comes pretty close. But at the same time, it's funny, it also takes a lot of stuff that is very clearly mythological and fictional and includes that, but it pretends that stuff is, air quotes, real life or grounded in realism, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess, like, the era, it accurately, or fairly accurately depicts the era, you know, yeah. I mean, the armor that they're using and everything, a lot of that's too modernized and all that stuff, but you know, reasonably, you know, Rome and Britain, it's hit and miss. But, like, the whole notion that the legends of Arthur and his knights were derived from, you know, this old, like, Roman legion, basically.
Uh-huh.
That's, like, one guy's theory, apparently.
Yeah.
Because I was really curious about that, so I ended up looking it up, and it's like, there's one historian who thinks that might be the case, but it's pretty much just seen as not provable. There's no hard evidence to back it up.
Yeah, there's actually, and you may want to get into this later after we've talked about the movie a little bit, there's actually a lot of stuff about Arthur that's not provable. Stuff like, when you get right down to it, the only stuff we know for certain, there was this historical document, I think it was called the Gododin Chronicle, that basically just covered historical events, and it popped up around maybe the 8th century, and it mentioned a guy named Arthur and a guy named Mordred who were in a fight. And that's about all that we know for certain. We don't know if Arthur was his real name or if it was like his title, like a chief or captain, something like that. So, like, there's really very little about the King Arthur mythos that you can say this happened in real life. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is derived from fiction, and I guess that's where I'm amused by this movie, is that it starts off with the claim that this is the real legend. This is the story as it actually happened. But then it throws in Merlin and it throws in Lancelot. And, like, Merlin is actually a combination of two historical people, both of whom weren't, you know, one of them was kind of a madman who lived in a forest, and one of them was a warlord, or kind of a captain of the Britons at one point, or maybe the Anglos. I can't even remember. He was a war chief, kind of like Arthur is in this movie. So, like, it takes things from the King Arthur mythos that are fiction from different versions of the story, and it tries to ground those things in realism. But I would say if anyone out there listening to this is interested in seeing something that is actually a real-life thing, they may want to go into this with that in mind, that they don't want to go into this thinking it's going to be 100% based in reality.
Yeah, and I mean, it really is just, it's taking the best way I guess I could describe it is taking the characters in the mythos and trying to make them seem real. So it's Nolanizing King Arthur before Nolanizing was a thing.
That's a very good metaphor. Yeah, I didn't think of it like that, but that's a very good. Yeah, I think I like that description.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like, okay, well, Merlin, so wizard, so okay, it's all illusion and tricks, and you know, he's like a woodsman, and so they're kind of like myths and legends around him, and so that's where you get wizard from. And then, you know, Arthur, he's like this greater than great knight, so he's obviously got a lot of Roman training, since that would put him miles above anyone else that he'd come into contact with. You know, it's all reasonable. It's all like, if you reason it out, this would make the most sense if we were to say that it's real. And so, I mean, that's the thing with this movie, is it really does bill itself inappropriately, in my mind. Because they go, like, the closest they get to basing it in history is they go, new archaeological evidence suggests, and that's it. It's just like, they don't even bother having someone say it, it's just there in subtitles.
Right.
And so that's the thing. It's like it's really silly, and like, I don't know, this might have been better if there was kind of a legend or like a through line of a legend being built up around Arthur and his men, you know?
Yeah. There's a movie, I don't know if you saw the Dwayne Johnson Hercules movie. I saw it somewhat recently. I actually hated that movie, but throughout that movie, Hercules' nephew keeps telling these stories, these very larger-than-life stories about Hercules, and then we see that those stories didn't happen and they're exaggerations. While I really didn't like that movie, I wonder if something like that would have worked out really well in this. Like, if we see Merlin, like, telling stories to children about Arthur or something like that, and then we're seeing what, air quotes, really happened in the movie.
Yeah.
That might have worked.
It's funny, because, like, that was the second Hercules movie we got that year, and the other one was called Legend of Hercules, and that was actually a more appropriate title for the Dwayne Rock Johnson movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, like, I think that would have worked out here, yeah, certainly. As far as, like, stuff that I actually did like about it, I like the way they do the Sword and the Stone thing with Arthur. Because, I mean, when you think of Arthur, you think, yeah, Sword and the Stone, Merlin, Knight, right? Those are the things that come to your mind.
Yeah, definitely. I think even people who aren't very familiar with King Arthur, they know about the Sword and the Stone. So that's definitely something. You're missing an opportunity if you don't include that in a King Arthur story, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that really works in this. Because that was a pretty good scene, seeing the kid, you know, run to go get a sword. It's a little weird he goes through a graveyard of swords just to get to that one particular.
Right.
But I don't know.
And did you, getting back a little bit to the talking about Nolanizing the myths, do you think maybe anyone who isn't aware of the alleged goal of this movie, do you think they might enjoy this movie more if they weren't aware that it's supposed to allegedly be the real-world King Arthur story?
If you just blocked out those subtitles, you would never know.
Right.
So yeah, I think that would be significantly more enjoyable. Because it's weird when movies do that, when they go so fictionalized, yet they try to sell themselves as historical.
this is
like
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know. I just feel like it would have been. It's such an irksome thing because it's really nothing of the movie except that one little subtitle.
Right.
And yet that's like kind of what the whole movie is grounded in. It's the same thing was done with the Ridley Scott Robin Hood movie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's like, oh, here's the actual history version of it. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No.
And what's weird is I hate it when a movie does this where you have a very larger-than-life mythology, and then they try to do a movie that takes away all of that. Like Troy with Brad Pitt.
I actually really like Troy.
I like Troy a lot, too, and I like this movie. I'm a little more ambivalent on the Ridley Scott Robin Hood. I remember enjoying it for the most part when I saw it in theaters, but I haven't really given that movie much thought since then. But, like, with Troy and this movie, I really love them both. But at the same time, it's really weird to me, taking it to King Arthur. If everyone is familiar with King Arthur and you think, okay, magical fairies who live in a lake, a magic sword that only the worthy can pull out of a stone, those are the things you think of when you think of King Arthur. And then...
and also, help, I'm being repressed.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, those things are what you think of when you think of King Arthur, and then this movie says, okay, we're going to start by taking away all of that. And I'm surprised I like this movie as much as I do, considering that it does that. It would be like if someone said, we're going to do a Superman movie, but we're going to take away, he's not going to have any of his powers, and he doesn't work at the Daily Planet. Like, I don't know, like, I guess Smallville kind of does that, but, you know, it's weird that I like this movie when it does that.
Yeah, and, like, I think what's important is I still believe that Arthur is Arthur.
Right.
You know? Like, Clive Owen's performance and the character that they write for him, like, I talked about the Sword in the Stone scene, and I also really like when he's praying in the stables. Like, I'm not a huge fan of when a character is made religious just for their character basis, because, like, it just seems like something a writer seems to tick off. But here, I think it's actually a fairly big part of the movie. I just don't know if they really finish it.
No, they don't. Not at all. The whole idea of, I think, religion in King Arthur is something that it would be hard to take that away. Because this is supposed to be a time period where I've seen other versions of King Arthur where the whole theme is the old gods and the old religion is slowly fading away, and Christianity is kind of coming in to replace it. There was a mini-series with Sam Neill. I want to say it was in 98. That was a big theme in that, where that whole mini-series spanned like 3 generations, and that's a big part of it. And so, like you, I kind of like King Arthur. I like Arthur's... his whole religious, I guess his beliefs versus the beliefs of everyone else in the movie. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of his knights are religious, are they?
No, they're all pagans.
Right, okay. And so, like, there was some, and like, with that scene you're talking about where he's praying in the stables, there is some really strong stuff between him and Lancelot there. Really good character stuff there that comes from that. You're right that after that scene, Arthur, his faith kind of disappears. It mostly becomes...
I wouldn't say it disappears, because it comes back later in the torture scene and stuff, but...
You're right,
it doesn't feel like it's concluded at all. It's not like, you know, the Saxon at the end who, like, they dropped stuff with him as well, like the whole genetic purity thing that he has in his first scene. They dropped that, but, like, it's just the religious angle on Arthur doesn't really come to any natural conclusion. It's not like because... I mean, this would have been kind of kooky to do, especially with modern sensibilities, but it's not like because of his devotion to the Christian God, he's able to defeat the Saxon who's a pagan or anything. Like, it doesn't come to any conclusion, and, like, it's weird because they kill Lancelot and he makes a big deal out of it, and he, like, shouts out to God something to the effect of, you know, not like this, I didn't want this.
Yeah, it was supposed to be me. Did he say something like that?
Yeah, something to that effect. And so it's like, it doesn't really go anywhere with the religious angle, which is odd. And they also dropped stuff with the Saxon, because he kind of had that whole genetic purity thing in his first scene.
Right. Which also I thought that was it was a good way to make the villain very interesting. He could have just been a very generic, I just want to kill people bad guy. But when he was telling his guy, no, she's impure, you're not going to get with her, and then he kills his man, I thought that, I don't want to say it made him more fleshed out, but it did. I think the actor, he's doing more with the material than what the script is, maybe, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's just that it's again, it just kind of sets something up and doesn't go anywhere with it, and that's the problem. And, like, that could have been interesting to do, and honestly, he doesn't need much motivation to want to go kill people. I mean, he has, Roman colonialism. That's his motivation.
Right.
So, like, you didn't need the genetic purity thing, but it's weird they don't do much with it. Like, the other thing about history that's just weird here is it all takes place in Britain during the end of the Roman occupation, which would be fine,
mm-hmm.
but Arthur's a Christian, and you can't have both of those. You can't have Christians open in Rome and still have Rome with any kind of real presence in the British territory.
Right, right.
Because that doesn't, like, Christianity isn't, a thing that you can be as a Roman. You can't be a Christian in Rome until Constantine, and Constantine came to power by starting a military revolution, basically, or military coup from the British Isles. So
yeah, and that's another thing that I'm not as familiar with the straight up history as it sounds like you are. So I probably would have had more of a problem with it if I was as familiar with it, like what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't something that really occurred to me, but it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, so, like, the thing is, Constantine was pretty much the emperor to get rid of the British Isles, so it's just real. Well, not quite, but he definitely degraded their presence there because he just saw it as undefendable. And so there's other little weird things like that, like the Pope is kind of giving, you get the sense in this film that the Pope is the one kind of giving orders.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case at all, because the Pope wasn't a political power until after the collapse of Rome.
Right.
So it's little stuff like that where it's like, yeah, this is a really weird decision. Because like I could dig it more if it really immersed itself and tried to be, super accurate while telling a mythological story. But it kind of has, one foot in one pond and the other foot in the other.
Exactly. Yeah. It's one of those things, both of those things you said, the thing about Constantine and the thing about the Pope not having power until later, both of those would not have been a problem with this movie if it just set out to be a King Arthur movie. But the fact that at the very beginning of the movie, it starts off by saying, this is the real story, here you go, and then it starts off by getting historical facts wrong, and not just like things about King Arthur that probably didn't exist, not that, but actual historical facts that we know to be true, getting that stuff wrong, that's a really strange mistake to make. It's something that could have very easily been researched before starting your movie. And you could maybe make an argument that historical accuracy can take a backseat to telling a really good story. But again, they made such a big deal about this story being historically accurate that it's very strange that they then make historical mistakes like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, like, we keep saying that it's just one line in the beginning of the movie, but no, it's the marketing of this film that sold it as the historical Arthur, if you will.
Right.
It'd be like me making a historically accurate George Washington biopic and then having the cherry tree scene in there. That didn't happen. That's a modern myth that we've for some reason come up with. And, there's nothing wrong with mythology, but I find it irksome when someone tries to represent this as history and then they, like, depict facts as
mythology as facts.
Yeah. When they tell, like, when they make a war story, into, like, this is what actually happened. Like, no.
Yeah.
No, they're war stories. People exaggerate. So it's one of those weird things. But let's go ahead and get off of that a little bit. So you said this is your favorite version of Arthur, or one of your favorites?
I would say this is my favorite movie of King Arthur. Of course, there's not that many when you think about it. There was this one, and then I think a couple of years later there was a movie called The Last Legion that had Ben Kingsley in it, and it was sort of along the same lines, trying to base itself in the real world. Tonally, it's a lot more of a, I don't want to say goofy action movie, but it's a lot more like, say, the first Mummy movie with Brendan Fraser. It's a lot like, is it Brendan Fraser? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very similar in tone to that movie. And it's got Colin Firth. I always get those two Collins confused. It's got him, and it's a decent movie. It's not as good as this movie, and at the end of the movie you realize it's not nearly as much of a King Arthur story as you might think. But it's an alright movie. And then there was that miniseries from the 90s, and I really liked it, the one with Sam Neill. That was actually probably my introduction to King Arthur. I don't remember if I watched it first or the Disney Sword in the Stone movie, but I really think that if it wasn't for that Sam Neill miniseries, I probably wouldn't be much of a King Arthur fan.
Okay, and where does Quest for Camelot rank on your list?
I don't think I've seen that. Is that the...
Don't.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, that's based on a book by Vera Chapman, and I have read the story that it's based on, I think.
Well, if you ever wanted to hear Gary Oldman sing "And Now Watch Me Create My Army of Mechanical Monsters," then that's the movie to watch. But that should be a great indication of the quality of that film. Anyway, no, but like I do like it, it's a weird thing because I have a lot of problems with this movie, but it's hard not to like in at least some ways.
Right.
It is kind of like. It's a step above a dumb Hollywood action movie, but not a big step.
Right. It's got a lot of tales like that make it a very close cousin to a dumb action movie. But like you said, there's also elements that make it seem smarter than what a normal dumb Hollywood action movie would be. Like I feel like those elements of Arthur praying, like that's some really good stuff, and like the friendship between Arthur and Lancelot is really good. But yeah, I'd say you're right. It's just a small step. You were saying that it's it's a pretty, or I guess I was thinking this. To me, this is to King Arthur back in the early 2000s when we first started getting those superhero movies, a whole bunch of them. Like the first X-Men movie. I don't know if what your opinion is on those X-Men films, but the first X-Men film came right at the beginning of that huge onslaught that really hasn't stopped yet. And I feel like at the time that movie came out, everyone was just in awe of that movie. But then when they go back and look at it now, they say, okay, there's some problems with that movie. But at the time, everyone loved it so much, I think partly because there weren't that many superhero movies up until that point, and the ones that we had gotten weren't very good. I think that's kind of what I've got going on with this King Arthur movie, is that this is my favorite King Arthur movie just because we haven't had that many, and all the ones that have come out haven't been very good either.
Gotcha. Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it, because yeah, it's a step above your typical dumb action movie in just what it does with its characters. So what I feel like we might have here is kind of like a studio maybe merging a pre-established script with a couple, unique. Let's be kind and calling unique ideas. Because like it's already kind of this merge of like historical. It's a period piece merged with a mythology piece. Because I don't want to call it historical, because it's definitely not. I think we've pretty much beat that into the ground. But like it's clearly a period piece. and then it's merged with this, like, you know, mythological story. And so I feel like we had one script that was, like, a really good character study of, like, King Arthur and the knights. And then we have another script that was kind of like a dumb action movie set in the Middle Ages, and they just kind of got put together.
Right. Yeah, it does have that feel to it. You're right.
There was a movie just a couple of years ago. I think it was called The Eagle. It was about like some Roman legion in Britain, and they had to get a golden eagle back to the back behind Hadrian's Wall and stuff. I did like the touch of Hadrian's Wall. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and that's another one of those things that if they did any historical research at all, they probably saw some scholars suggest that Arthur, if he did exist, was based near Hadrian's Wall. That's one of those things that if they did do research, they probably saw that somewhere.
Maybe, I don't know. It's a pretty big part. Like, the thing was around for 400 or 500 years.
Right,
so.
right. Well, I've read a couple of books that are in, I guess, keeping with this being History Month for Geeky Gentlemen. I've read a couple of books that kind of try to say, here's where the myth stops, and here's where the history begins for King Arthur. And I know in one or two of those books that I've read, they mention Hadrian's Wall as being kind of close to where he would have done his campaigning if there was a historical basis for Arthur. So, like you said, I think that's a good touch.
Yeah, and I mean, we have that hill at the end, and that's, from what I understand, like the battle on that hill is a big part of Arthur myth as well. So, just on a filmmaking side of things, that last battle is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
It took me a minute. I'm like, wow, this has been going on for a long time as I was watching it, because I was just so invested in it. And then I was like, wow, actually, this has been like good 20 minutes of the movie thus far.
Yeah.
And it's weird because most of the movie is, okay, let's run away, let's get across this lake. And then I'm like, oh, so it's just going to be one of those movies.
Yeah.
But no, they actually do stand and have a legit battle, which is pretty cool. And it's a white savior movie that actually is appropriate because he's saving other white people.
Yeah, and like, I'm trying to think, were there any people of color in this movie?
No.
Okay. See, that would have been...
Unless you count Italians.
Right. I was trying to think for a minute when you said that, and that just kind of took me aback, because the movie, The Last Legion, I guess this may be a spoiler for it, but Ben Kingsley is in it, and he plays Merlin by a different name. Then at the end of the movie, they reveal that he's Merlin. And I was just wondering, when you said that, if there were any characters like, some of the knights who were black or something, but I couldn't think of any, and I couldn't remember.
Well, I mean, it's weird because they cast all these white guys, and they're like, it's okay to do that since apparently, they're for generations they've been, put out at Britain.
Right.
So it would make sense that some of the offspring are actually, half British, half whatever Eastern country they're from.
Yeah.
But they do imply that, the Knights of the Round Table are from the Middle East or Persians or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that they do that, but they cast white people. So it's one of those weird things where it's actually kind of appropriate.
Right. Well, they could have very easily. I think in one of either the Once and Future King or L'Amour de Arthur, there was a Moor who was a knight, and they could have, maybe it would have felt like tokenism, like we don't have any black people, we have to throw one in. Maybe it would have felt like that, but it also feels very alarming to me, like when I just realized that there aren't any black people or Middle Eastern people in this movie, and it's all, just a bunch of white guys. Like, I feel like they could have put one in. Which Robin Hood movie was it where they added a Turkish character to the Merry Men?
Only Robin Hood movie I know of with someone in it that isn't white is Men in Tights because of Dave Chappelle.
Oh, okay. It might be the one with I can't think of his name. He was in not Men in Tights, but the one with Kevin Costner. That might be the one that I was thinking of. And
that's the one that Men in Tights makes fun of.
Right?
Actually.
Yeah. And maybe it would have felt really like really forced if they had done that, but I think maybe they could have done it. That could have been another good example, because a big part of this movie is Arthur in his divided heritage. You know, his father was his father was a Roman and his mother was one of the natives, and so he's kind of divided on should he serve Rome or should he serve the people who were here before Rome. And maybe a good, because Guinevere in this movie, she doesn't show up until like halfway into the film, and then she kind of is she kind of acts as his shoulder angel, I guess you could say, telling him, you know, hey, these people were here before the Romans, you should maybe stop killing them. And maybe if she wasn't fulfilling that role, maybe they could have had like a Moorish knight kind of playing that role, and it would have been present earlier in the movie than before Guinevere shows up, maybe. But it probably would have felt forced if they had done that.
I don't know, like, I'm okay with it just being, you know, all white people, because the time period and where it takes place at, it's at least passable. That being said, I did just recently watch a fan film called Predator: Dark Ages. Uh-huh. And they put the Predator in the Middle Ages hunting a knight, which is a really cool idea. Huh. And, like, the way they do it is, apparently, like, one had been in Jerusalem, and so they have a... what do they call him? Because there's a name for it.
Sarmatian, or... They mention it in this movie. I think it's Sarmatian or Summation or something like that.
Yeah, it's, the pronunciation's all Sumerian, maybe. Something with a K, I'm feeling. Anyway, so yeah, they have that guy, they have one of those guys there, so it was kind of neat the way they worked that in. So it certainly could work. There is some precedent for it, but not a ton, because, you know, world was a bigger place back then,
right?
Physically speaking, because history.
Let me ask you, how familiar are you with King Arthur before watching this movie, and do you have a favorite like King Arthur film outside of this film, or is this it for you?
I mean, I'm not like a huge King Arthur fan. I'm not a big like you know, Middle Ages kind of myth fan. Like I do like mythology, but it's more, you know, ancient Greek and
there you go.
And
yeah,
stuff.
I'm a big Greek mythology fan too. So whenever I was thinking of what we should do for this, I was kind of torn on King Arthur or like Greek mythology, but I figured King Arthur would be a little easier to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, you should read the new 52 Wonder Woman book that's all about Greek mythology. It's really well done.
Okay. I haven't read it yet.
Oh, it's people get pissed at it, but it's really well done in my opinion.
Yeah, I've heard mixed things about it.
Yeah, but so like, no, I'm not a huge Middle Ages fan. The only like thing that's, you know, close to, you know, Middle Ages stuff that I really like, fantasy proper, that I really care for, is Game of Thrones.
Okay. Yeah.
And, you know, that's possibly the most distant thing I can imagine to, as far as King Arthur goes, in opposites there.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. There was and this may be getting away from this movie a little bit, but there was a TV show. I want to say 2011 is when it came out. It just lasted one season. It was called Camelot, and it had one of the Fiennes brothers, not the one who played Voldemort, but Ralph, maybe. No, Joseph. Joseph Fiennes plays Merlin in it, and he's also the woman from Casino Royale, who I can't think of her name either. Oh wow, she's Morgan Le Fay. But it's kind of, I don't watch Game of Thrones, but what little I know of it, this Camelot TV show, it was on, I want to say Stars. Yeah, it was on Stars. And it's sort of similar to Game of Thrones, a little bit. Like, it's more of an adult take on the King Arthur story. And
yeah. And, I mean, the interesting thing about Game of Thrones is it's actually, I would argue, more based in history than this, and it takes place on a fictional world with giant spiders.
Right. And it's also, you know, isn't that based on the War of the Roses, historical?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
that's where he took a lot of his inspiration from, is from actual, you know, feudal politics.
Right.
And so it's one of those really funny things. There are dog-sized spiders in the books of that universe, and yet that is more historically accurate than this film.
Right.
Anyway, so no, I'm not a huge Arthur fan. I just, like I said, I've never been into, not never. I was kind of into, medieval fantasy for a while when I was in middle school. And I think that's mostly because I had a lot of castle Legos.
Yeah.
I just had a lot of castle Lego sets, so I was really into that because that's the story you tell with them.
Yeah. I guess I had a question about, or I was wanting to ask you something about this movie. What did you think of the other knights? Like everyone except for Lancelot.
I actually really like all of them, including Lancelot. I love their dynamic, and the guys really do pull off a good job of making you believe that they've been stuck with each other all their lives.
Yeah.
Especially.
Go ahead.
Especially Lancelot's running gag about how he's sleeping with everyone's wife.
Right.
I love that moment where the dude gets his baby and he sees Lancelot kind of like,
See if Lancelot looks like the baby.
Yeah, that is so funny.
Yeah, I like Lancelot in this too. I really think after seeing this movie, I think the actor Gruffud, I cannot pronounce his name. I think he gets he maybe just had some bad luck being in those Fantastic Four movies because I think he's a really good actor here. But I was curious about the other actors or the other knights because my problem with it was I felt like it was hard for me to keep up with the other knights other than Lancelot. I feel like a few of them kind of blend together to me outside of Lancelot and Bors. Bors being the one with all the kids.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I mean, you got the one with the hawk. Like, that's the thing, I don't even know their names.
Right.
You got the one with the hawk, you got the one with the bow and arrow. So, like, they're distinct enough that you can certainly tell them apart when you see them, but they do kind of fade into the back of your head when you're thinking about the movie on the whole.
Yeah. That's one thing where... I don't know if you know this. Next year, there's going to be a King Arthur movie that will come out, directed by Guy Ritchie, who did the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies, and it is I'm tentatively looking forward to it because allegedly their plan is this is going to be the first in a franchise of King Arthur movies. Now maybe that'll end up being
the King Arthur shared universe.
Yeah. Now it might end up being really terrible because. Sometimes whenever a movie sets out planning for sequels that never happen, it looks really embarrassing. There was that, I guess a little over 10 years ago, they did that Aragon movie, based on those, youth books, and like, they planned for a sequel. It's very clearly got, what will happen next moment at the end, and then nothing happens with it. So like, it could end up being something like that. But what I'm tentatively looking forward to with that movie is that if you had just a trilogy of King Arthur movies, you would really have a lot of room to explore and flesh out some of these knights. Because like you said in this movie, it's hard to remember their names. If you aren't reading about King Arthur and, researching this stuff in your own free time just because you're a huge King Arthur fan, you're not going to know these guys' names except for Arthur, Merlin, and Lancelot. And I think if they were to do... And it wouldn't have worked here. I don't think this movie is one that really would have needed a sequel, and it probably would have been really weird if they did a sequel to it. But if they did that, like with this King Arthur movie coming out next year, where they take their time and they introduce just a few knights and really flesh them out, it could be really good. It could be something that hasn't been done before with King Arthur.
And then you really could do a shared universe if you flesh them out enough, because you can give each knight his own movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know you were joking when you said that, but, like, you've had, like, there have been, it's funny, I've read several different King Arthur stories from, spread out over the years, and a lot of times King Arthur is just kind of not doing anything in most of the stories. Most of the time, like, if it's the story of Sir Gawain or the story of Sir Balin, most of the time, King Arthur is there.
Brave Sir Robin who runs away.
What?
Or brave Sir Robin who runs away. Sorry. I cannot help myself. I've got to make Monty Python jokes. Yeah. You're just lucky that I haven't done the speech yet.
But yeah, King Arthur usually is just kind of the guy who's there at the very beginning of the movie, or the very beginning of the story, and then he may send a knight on a quest, and then you don't see him again in the rest of the story. So, like, you were joking about that earlier, but you could do a good, like, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight story, and Arthur would be in maybe the first 15 minutes of the movie, and that'd be it. And you know, they haven't. I think they maybe tried to do a Gawain and the Green Knight story back in the 80s with Sean Connery, and I don't know how that went at all. I haven't heard many good things about it, but, you know, I'm still kind of waiting for King Arthur to get its big break, because, like I said, there was that Camelot TV show, which I don't watch Game of Thrones, but what I've seen of Camelot kind of feels like Game of Thrones for King Arthur, and I'm kind of angry that this show ended. It went one season and then it ended, and I think the official party line is that all the actors couldn't get their schedules to line up, and so they just canceled the show. But I'm really, really disappointed that this show didn't keep going, because I think that people who watch Game of Thrones probably would have dug this show if it had gone on a little longer and maybe got some traction so people would have heard of it.
No, it's one of those things where, like, I really could get behind a wider universe for that. And I think that's one of my big problems with this movie is it sets up that this is the beginning and the end of the Arthur myth, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, people wouldn't be telling stories about him because he was their enemy until this movie, right?
Uh-huh.
And so then he joins their side and gets married, and that's the end of the thing, and, like, all his deeds have already been done. So it's like, well, then what are they telling stories about? All the times that he killed them?
Right.
I just don't know why they'd go around with that.
And that's another thing, is that a lot of times in these King Arthur stories, you'll hear about how Camelot had a golden age of peace and prosperity for like 25 years, but then you see all these stories about these knights going on adventures, and you have to wonder, okay, how much of an era of peace and prosperity was it? Was it just within the castle walls, and then the knights are going outside to have adventures with bad guys? Or, you know, were they just really bored and they just want to go out there and find some trouble to get into?
Yeah, it's something for a Cracked video almost, isn't it? You can really almost see an After Hours just spun out of that little thought right there.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things where, like, Grant Morrison did Seven Soldiers of Victory, and we did an episode of that here on the show, and, like, they talk about how Camelot was, like, this amazing utopia that kind of, like, blended technological and magical achievements together, so almost like, you know, Thor-level society back before recorded history began on Earth. And it's Grant Morrison. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
The man's genius. So it's like, that was an interesting way to look at, you know, the mythos of Arthur and Camelot is just this, you know, perfect society, but with middle-age culture.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've read Seven Soldiers. That's one of those things I probably need to go back and reread. But one of the ideas, specifically in the Shining Knight portion, that I really liked was the idea that Camelot and all of the main players in the King Arthur story are recurring throughout history. So, like, there's been multiple King Arthurs, and there's been multiple Morgan Le Fays, etc., and multiple Merlins. And that, to me, was interesting because Arthur, if he did existed probably towards the end of the 400s, very early 500s. But then, like, around the 1300s, like when the Crusades were going on, you had people writing stories about King Arthur, but it was almost like they were taking those characters and putting them in the present day at the time. So it would be like if I was writing stories about, I don't know, like people who fought in the Spanish-American War, but then giving them cell phones and computers or something like that. Like they were taking.
They'd probably just look at it and then try to hit someone with it. I don't know.
Like, they were taking these historical characters who probably in the 1300s, they didn't even know if these characters existed in real life or not, and then they were placing them in the contemporary era and, you know, giving them, like, shining, the armor of the time period and the weapons of the time period. like L'Amour d'Arthur is written by I think Sir Thomas Malory, and like a lot of his story is all about knights dueling each other and stuff like that, which was probably happening a lot more around the time of the Crusades than it was, 800 years earlier. And that's one of those things about Morrison's...
I don't know. You look up the history of the Middle Ages, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah. But that's what I like about Morrison's Seven Soldiers, is that he kind of references that a little bit, saying that there have been numerous King Arthurs and numerous Camelots throughout history. And so it allows for... it allows for every version of King Arthur that you've seen and that you love to all exist simultaneously.
So it's like the James Bond codename theory.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Certainly. And that's the thing I like about, these ancient mythologies, because King Arthur is kind of one of the first ones to really do that, where it's like, all these characters, there were stories about Sir Lancelot, and there were stories about all the other knights, on their own, like before King Arthur was really a thing. There were all stories about all these other knights.
Right.
And then King Arthur kind of became a thing through them. Like King Arthur was introduced as a character, and that's where you get your original, the Avengers kind of setup, where it's like all these different characters of popular culture kind of coming together into stories. And like the same thing happened with Robin Hood, because what's her name? Mary. Yeah, she's a character all on her own as well, and so like I believe Friar John was even a character, and I mean that goes into modern American history to a certain extent, because it's a really racist ass movie. But you ever seen Bear Rabbit?
No, I don't even think I've...
No, Song of the South.
I've seen clips. I haven't seen the whole movie, but I know, it's racist, definitely.
Yeah, it's racist as shit. Animation's still brilliant, though. But anyway, it's racist as shit, but Uncle Remus, the character in that telling the stories about Brer Rabbit, was this, like, mythological former slave in the post-Civil War South who went around telling stories to children about Brer Rabbit and the Briar Patch.
Uh-huh.
So it's like that kind of thing of these characters kind of coming together in this folkloric history exists throughout history, which is really interesting to look at.
Yeah.
That's how myth gets started, is it just starts as stories, and then over time it collects as people, like you question how much people truly believe in it and how much people believe in, the figure but not the myth.
Right.
Necessarily. Because, like, you have the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, written, basically beginning of history. It's the first written thing we have, besides taxes. You have Iliad and Odyssey that, oddly enough, take place at the end of all Greek myth, more or less.
Yeah.
And you have Homer write that, and then 400 or 500 years later, you have Plato, who is offended by Homer's depiction of Zeus. It's like, that's not how Zeus is at all. So it's one of those interesting things how myth and belief in actual figures kind of loosely blends together.
Yeah.
Over time. It's because people didn't used to be as skeptical as they are now.
Yeah.
Once you have an educational system, it gives people, a diverse amount of things to believe, but when they're, not introduced to a diverse number of opinions, they tend to just believe whatever someone happens to tell them.
Right.
If it sounds legit. And that's certainly what you get with a lot of mythology is, why do we have winter? Well, it's because Hades raped Persephone and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And I would say also, you mentioned earlier the world was a bigger place back then. It certainly what helped move these myths along and keep them going, I would say, would be that word traveled slower back then. If you wanted to go 100 miles today, it would take you a lot faster to go that distance than it would back then. So if I heard this story of this guy who won this big battle at Hadrian's Wall 500 miles away, by the time word of that has gotten to me, it's probably already gotten greatly exaggerated. But it's easier for me to just accept that as true than to go and see if that actually happened. Whereas now, half a world away is just a phone call that takes 10 seconds. And so, like, it's a lot easier. Back then, I guess it was a lot easier to just accept this really happened. Even if it didn't happen, it was easier to just accept it than it would be now. Nowadays, you can look into something, you can research something, and pretty quickly find out if this really happened or not. And
yeah. And it's one of those interesting things about how knowledge progresses, and we've certainly got more objective, and people just had a wider view of things. And that sounds like I'm giving them credit. I'm really not. It's just kind of an objective thing. They just were willing to accept more things even if they contradicted one another, and it didn't really matter to them. Contradictions weren't as big a problem back in the day.
Right.
For whatever reason, and it's just, you just kind of sorted it all out in your head and either thought about it or you didn't. And that's assuming you even had the time to think about it, because most people were, exhausted from farming or whatever.
Oh, yeah, they didn't have time to even, one thing that just occurred to me while we were having this conversation was that...
Let me get in one thing real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the word, and it's a really simple word, and it's not going to come to my head because I've been trying for the last 2 minutes here. I want to say it's like hick. Something to mean, like, when you think of a hick, something in that general category. It's a synonym for that. The reason that word exists is because, you'd have new religions that started out and then reasonably would spread in a city because, people are close together, and so they'd all, like, spread it around fast. And then you'd get hicks who are still worshiping older religions or whatever because they're just so far away from it, they don't know that there's a new god now. And I'm trying to remember the word that's just not coming to mind. It's something that means like hick and heathen kind of put together in one. Anyway, it's a really common word, and it's not going to hit me. I don't know.
Probably it'll hit you right after we're done recording.
Oh, it definitely will. No, but go ahead and say whatever you want to.
Yeah, we were talking about, how the world has changed since the days of, the end of Roman occupation. And it just kind of occurred to me that a lot of these King Arthur movies, like this one, I feel like is kind of hitting that spot. Definitely the miniseries with Sam Neill, the Merlin miniseries. Those both, I feel like they are trying to say that progress towards the modern day is a good thing. Like in the Merlin miniseries, a big part of that is that when the people stop believing in magic, the bad guy loses. The evil creature in that movie will stop existing when the people stop believing. And that's kind of played up as a good thing because finally that creature is going to stop menacing these people like it's been menacing people for 3 or 4 generations. But at the same time, people, when they stop believing, these myths of the good guys will kind of lose a little bit of that power that they had. Like, there's no way we could ever have a modern equivalent of King Arthur or Robin Hood today because of the internet and things that would just shoot it down so fast. But, back then, because people didn't have a way of looking into this, so it was just easier for them to accept it and believe it, that's what kind of helped move the King Arthur mythos into such a... It helped make it explode into the thing that it is. And I find it very...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of agree with... I see what you're saying. I don't quite agree 100% just because, I think that people in the modern era like to think they're so much smarter, but yet things persist.
Yeah.
I talked about it earlier with the George Washington thing. Mm-hmm. We know that's not true, but you ask any school child, did George Washington cut down a cherry tree? And they're going to say yes. And most people, unless they actively seek it out, are still going to believe that kind of thing. So I think it could still happen that like a mythological figure of stories about whom could still spread. Maybe not as grandiose, certainly, but
fair enough.
I think that kind of level of gullibility still exists in people.
Fair enough, yeah. And it was, growing up, I had teachers, our teachers told us, I don't know how it was for you, our teachers told us that when Columbus went to go on his ship, that everyone believed the world was flat. And then it wasn't until I got in college where I had a history teacher who said, yeah, that's not really true. So, you're right. There's definitely, and I should I agree with you. Just because we have like modern technology now does not mean that we as a society are necessarily smarter. Like we still live in an era where, I mean, you're just one click away from seeing people use technology and they're using it for dumb things like, I don't know, we have dumb cat videos and stuff like that like you're thinking, wow, this is the sum of our society. But then, I don't know, I think like the whole idea of like these movies, and I think that this one does it a little bit less than that Merlin miniseries, but like the idea of we're progressing forward, like at the end of this movie, King Arthur has kind of united everyone under him, and everyone, that's going to be one step closer to the present day, where you're right, we could still have like George Washington. There's still the mythological George Washington that everyone knows about and everyone is taught about in school, and then there's the real George Washington. But I do feel like it's less so than what it would have been, 500 years ago. You still there?
Yeah, sorry, I had to go close the door.
Okay.
No, but there's buses and garbage trucks outside, and it's distracting me.
No, that's fine.
No, I heard you, though. I do agree with that. It's like, it certainly could be more grounded. I don't think people will ever believe in dragons again.
Right.
Speaking of which, if that new King Arthur movie doesn't have someone fight a goddamn dragon, I'm gonna be upset.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's such a thing. Like, that's the one really cool thing about Middle Ages, is people fought dragons.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you might like that 90s Merlin miniseries, because there's a scene with a dragon that, on the one hand, while this movie or that miniseries is almost 20 years old, it's been a little while since I've seen it, but I've seen the dragon looked pretty cool in it. And maybe that's just my nostalgia trying to make me think that it looks better than it does. But I remember it looking pretty awesome when I was a kid. But that was one of those things that I did one of those King Arthur books that I read was saying that, the dragon was actually kind of a symbol for the people of Britain. And so that's why a lot of times you don't see King Arthur characters fighting dragons. Like they'll fight other monsters, but they don't necessarily fight dragons. Like there's this one mythical creature called the Questing Beast, and one of the minor knights, like his whole purpose is killing the Questing Beast. And then in Gawain and the Green Knight, like it just offhandedly mentions in between him leaving Camelot and then going to the main part of the story, he kills all these monsters on his way there. But yeah, I'm sure we'll see. Well, I don't know, actually. I don't know much about what this new King Arthur movie is going to be like. I'm assuming we will see something mythological in it. I don't know if we'll see a dragon, but I have a feeling that movie is going to be more mythological than this King Arthur movie with Clive Owen.
Yeah, I'd certainly hope so, because like this, you got to remember the era of this movie. There were a lot of things like this coming out. We were in love with Greek mythology kind of grounded movies for a long time there.
Like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, Troy, 300, Clash of the Titans.
Yeah.
Like those all came out so, Immortals.
Oh boy.
Yeah, there were so many movies, and it wasn't like necessarily grounded, but it was more gritty and at least quasi-realistic.
Yeah.
Like it was supposed to feel more real than it was or whatever.
Yeah.
This is one of those, and it's so weird, and like I don't know why a Wonder Woman movie didn't get released during that time period.
Oh yeah. There's no excuse for a Wonder Woman movie to have not happened. Period.
Yeah, agreed. But still, I mean, just like that was your time, guys.
Right. Oh yeah.
Add your moment.
To your point about like the Guy Ritchie one, the coming out next year, I will say just based on the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies, those movies felt like action movies that just happened to be set in the right before the Industrial Revolution. Like before those movies, I think 99% of people pictured Sherlock Holmes as being really dull, like he just walks around and smokes a pipe, and then those movies have like, big explosions and stuff like that and chase scenes. I feel like since that's the same guy who's going to be bringing us this next King Arthur movie, we will probably see something along those lines for this King Arthur movie, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too. That does sound really interesting, and I'm excited for it. I just want something balls to the wall crazy. Like, I just, I want people flying on dragons and wizards casting fireballs in the air and shit. It will just be cool. Why haven't we gotten something super epic like that on film yet,
Well, it's kind of like also, going back to the superhero movie thing, in the early 2000s, it was very risky to try and actually do stuff from the superhero comics, so they wanted to play it safe. You don't want to do the X-Men wearing colorful costumes. You want them all wearing black leather and stuff like that. But as we moved forward, here we are 15 years later, nobody's going to look twice at a superhero wearing a costume that looks pretty much like the costume they wear in the comics. And I feel
or even more, exaggerated and extravagant than in the comics, like Superman. The Man of Steel logo, it's the S is huge. There's all this detail in the costume and stuff, which, I really enjoy because I feel like if your movie's going to be in HD, you should earn it. And so, that's one of the things. I like all the embellishments and stuff, and so it is arguably more exaggerated than the costume in the comic books is. That's pretty much just blue and, it looks like pajamas.
Yeah. So I would be very surprised if this King Arthur movie we're getting next year is going to be anything like this movie the King Arthur movie with Clive Owen. If Merlin, I don't even know if Merlin's in that movie actually, but if you don't have somebody casting spells, if it's just going to be a gritty historical movie that happens to have Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot, I'll be very shocked if that's the direction they go in it, simply because they already did that in this movie. It would be like if a superhero movie came out right now that felt like it was trying to do what the movies were doing 15 years ago.
Yeah, I'd agree. And that's just the thing, it's kind of what you want, really. When you think of King Arthur, you think of a very particular thing, and you want to see that blended with, the modern action kind of stuff.
Exactly. And
I think it could be a lot of fun.
And that's what I was saying, what I want with King Arthur is something, it's like a kind of a cross between this and your typical fantasy. I want to see some really epic battles. I want to see fight scenes that aren't just playing it safe. I want to see characters die. I want to see the stakes be really high, but I don't want to see them completely remove the fantasy elements. I do want to see, the Lady of the Lake, and I want to see the Sword in the Stone, and Merlin is an actual wizard, stuff like that. And so that's what I'm kind of eagerly anticipating it too, but I'm also a little bit afraid that they're going to do something that's so very different from what I want to see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Lady of the Lake, man, I'm just saying, some watery tart passing out swords is not an effective form of government.
Yeah.
I used to have that whole speech memorized.
Oh, that's from the Monty Python?
Yeah, it's when, they're like, how'd you get to be king anyway? The Lady of the Lake, her arm clad in the purest shimmering samite, held aloft Excalibur from the bosom of the Wanderer, signifying by divine providence that I, Arthur, was to carry Excalibur. That is why I am your king. Listen, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a man-made from the masses, not from some... I can't get through it.
Yeah.
I'm reading it online. I can't get through it. It's my favorite scene in that movie.
Got your chance then. We were talking earlier about you were maybe going to get to recite that speech, so you got your chance here.
Yeah. And I totally blew it, and I apologize.
Oh no, that's fine.
Yeah, I let you down. No, I like Monty Python's take on King Arthur. That's my favorite version of King Arthur.
Yeah.
To answer your question from earlier, is that an accurate take on King Arthur at all? Did Arthur carry coconuts?
Well, I would say it's. I mean, I guess this is sort of a serious answer to maybe a silly question, but it's a valid take in that people like it and people have accepted it, I would almost say any version of King Arthur can be valid, depending on what people want to see, And, like, Monty Python is definitely probably the most popular version of King Arthur. Like, I would say, say either that or the Disney Sword in the Stone movie. Like,
yeah.
So, you know, even though it doesn't take itself seriously, maybe that's what people want. Maybe people want a King Arthur movie that's poking fun at itself a little bit. And
I don't know. I think people could accept an actual, you know, grounded kind of King Arthur or a serious King Arthur movie. It's just silly fun for me.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely what I want. I want something that's like a serious action fantasy movie, but at the same time, if it was a good movie and they ended up doing it as almost a comedic farce next year, I might initially be disappointed, but then I might end up really loving it. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay, is there anything else you wanted to say about the 2004 movie real quick?
I don't think so. I think we covered just about everything worth talking about.
Yeah, I just had a couple of things I wanted to get out. That dude's son is a really shit military commander.
Oh,
just saying.
Are you talking about the one that they rescued? The kid that they...
No. Like, him.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
There are a lot of drop plot threads in this movie, and that kid is one of them. But also, yeah, the dude's son is, like, the Saxon's son is, like, such a shit commander.
Yeah. That kid that they rescue is kind of the R2-D2 of this movie, where he's meant to get the plot rolling, and then once they get to the certain point, then you just kind of get rid of him. Like, yeah. I honestly, like, after that point in the movie when they get back and Dagonet has died, and then all the knights are, like, really mad at that religious guy who sent them on this quest, like, and they all get their papers. At that point, you're right, the kid disappears completely at that point, but at that point, I'm not, like, during the battle that you're, you know, the one you're saying, like, this is a really good battle, I'm not sitting there saying, where did that kid go? Like, at that point, I'm kind of okay with him disappearing from the movie.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, like, it helps that this is post Lord of the Rings, because it gets it to that epic point, and it's not 3.5 hours long.
Yeah.
There's a pretty good pace of action in the film, too, I'd say, but there are a lot of just dropped threads. Like, the other thing that I noticed is they kind of, and I'm assuming this is an allusion to the mythology, they kind of seem to set up that Lancelot has a thing for Guinevere, but don't really do anything with it from her side of the thing?
Yeah. As I recall, I read about this the first time I saw the movie. I think the script writer, someone wanted to do the love triangle thing. Either the director or the screenwriter. And then the other one, I think the screenwriter had written it as a big love triangle between the three. And then I think the director, he did some research and he felt like the love triangle wasn't realistic or wasn't historically accurate, to take it back to what we were talking about earlier. He felt like...
Oh, that's where he draws the line.
Yeah. And I thought that was really funny, considering I'm pretty sure Lancelot is one of the characters who is completely 100% fictional, like no historical basis for him at all, and that he thinks that a love triangle is too far. But you're right, there's one scene where she's in the little caravan thing getting dressed, and he's kind of staring at her.
And then he dies because he, like, sacrifices himself to go save her and everything. So it's a really weird thing, because, like, it seems like they're trying to build up some kind of weird Pirates of the Caribbean-esque love triangle, since it's, you know, Elizabeth Swann anyway.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of doesn't really seem... There's just, like, a lot of those things in this. I talked about it with, you know, with Arthur's religion, and with the Saxons' whole racial purity thing, and then with the kid, and then with the love triangle. There's a lot of that.
And the love triangle one especially would have been really easy to fix. Maybe not so much with the scene where he dies, but definitely whenever it's shortly after they've rescued her, and he's, like, watching her. I don't remember if she's getting dressed or if she's, like, someone is bandaged.
She's getting bandaged up or something.
And he's, like, staring at her. And that's, like, a scene you can cut out 5 seconds of the movie, and you wouldn't notice that it was gone. But if you leave it in there, it becomes, like you said, it really sticks out. It's like, hey, what happened to Lancelot kind of sort of having a thing for her? And like,
Yeah.
you could still have them have like they have some witty banter at one point at the frozen lake.
That's probably my favorite line in the movie.
Yeah. And like, you know, you could still have that between them, and it wouldn't necessarily look like they have a thing for each other. But you're right. That definitely felt weird that they were almost setting it up, but then dropping it.
Mm-hmm. I love that line so much. That is the funniest thing.
That is a pretty good.
There are a lot of lonely men out there. Don't worry, I won't let them rape you.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's just the last two things I wanted to get out there. All right. So, are you aware of how we do ratings on Geeky Gentlemen?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, it's on a 5 scale, and you have to pick something from the movie as your object. So instead of like 5 stars, you have to pick like 5 Excaliburs.
Oh, okay. You go first. Let me think of what.
Yeah, you're not allowed to use Excalibur.
Oh, right.
I'm gonna give this movie. It's gonna sound lower than like I really enjoy it, but it's gonna sound really low because I do think it has a lot of problems. I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5. Smashed up lakes. Okay. I'm gonna rate it higher than that. I'm gonna say. Oh wow, I keep thinking of what I want to rate it as. I would say 3.5 burning villages. Okay.
Yeah, I think the movie is pretty good. What really takes it down a notch for me is just like we talked about at the very beginning of the video, where the movie claims that it's this historically accurate piece, but then it goes so far out of its way to not be that. Like, if it didn't do that, then I think that I would have enjoyed this movie a lot more.
Yeah.
Probably would have been 4.5 out of 5 if I had done that.
Yeah, if they just said it's an Arthur that, you know, is quasi-historical, I would have felt more comfortable with it than this is the historical Arthur. So, anyway, everyone, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
That'll work. And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.